Aaron, thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast for the third time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, happy to be there. Always happy to have a good conversation.
Man, I really appreciate that about you. And I know you have a very busy job and, a young family. So I know how little margin we can have in our lives, being fathers and workers and husbands. So I just appreciate you taking, this hour or so to just have this conversation. It's really cool.
Absolutely.
So I know that last time we talked, you mentioned that you really loved the band Tool.
I did, yeah.
And I felt a little bad because you said when it was one of your favorites, I said, oh, it's one of my favorites too. And even though I still would say that, I realized I didn't know shit about Tool in relation to everything you know about it and how much you like it. So I may need to qualify my statement. It's one of my favorites.
I'm definitely one of those individuals that's can be a bit obsessive about it. And
Ooh, I like that.
And there's definitely those types of fans that can be a little bit overzealous about it. And I think that's true for potentially anything where you can have zealots that, probably take it too seriously. And, but they've been an important part of my life. And I've been listening to them for, 25 years maybe. And
dude, that's awesome.
I've seen them. I've lost track of how many times I've seen them. And, but yeah, that they've seen I've taken them with me everywhere I go. So
nice. Now, you also mentioned that you read the book, and I'm going to check the title, A Perfect Union of Contrary Things, which is it a autobiography of Maynard?
Yeah, I believe he had assistants writing it. So,
okay.
It's probably an autobiography, but I know he had assistants writing it. So, but
now I know you said that on the one hand you were, willing to talk about Tool, but there's some hesitation.
Yeah, and
which I thought was interesting, and I think something we should explore.
Okay, so I guess it's me as a musician as well, and someone who likes to write music and lyrics. I've always felt that they're very personal, and oftentimes the intent of the person that wrote it isn't necessarily the intent of how it's perceived.
Absolutely.
So I felt uncomfortable to, discuss something that was written by somebody else and how it impacted me and potentially completely misconstrue it.
Got you.
But then I'm thinking back, I was like, well, that's a big reason why musicians do what they do. They express things in the best way that they can. And then if people find help through it, even if it's not the original intent of how it was written, then how is that a bad thing? Which we had this conversation a few months ago, I guess, or a couple of months. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's probably 2 or 3 months.
Okay, but then I've been thinking a lot about it, and you reached out again, and you wanted to talk about it. He's like, "Man, who cares? It's fun to talk about." And
fuck it.
Yeah, fuck it. Exactly.
I'm glad that you got to the fuck it point. And I told my wife, I don't want to be like an annoying little drop of water on your forehead, but
no.
I just think this conversation has so much to it that I was eager to do it. One thing I was going to say, a little bit of like a nerd statement. So back in my first graduate degree, I ended up studying something called hermeneutics, which I don't know if you're familiar with that discipline.
I'm not.
But it's basically the study of interpretation, particularly around religious texts, but I think it can relate to almost anything: song lyrics, poetry, philosophical text. And it comes from the Greek god Hermes, who was known for hermeneutics, known for being a god of like commerce or sending messages. And in certain Jungian circles, he gets connected to like reading the soul or interpreting our inner depths. And one of the things that one of our professors would always say is when it comes to any text, whether it's, the Bible or I would say a Tool lyric, there is always a surplus of meaning. Mm-hmm. Like the author may have intended this or that, but the audience, the reader, the interpreter is going to resonate with various levels of significance.
There's metaphors.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that to me gives me some courage to look at a Tool lyric or a poem and honor, okay, I might not be getting exactly what they were talking about, but this is how it speaks to me.
Mhm.
And I want to be responsible with that. But I think it can open different windows and just vistas to, yeah, greater significance.
Well, in
Does
one
that
of
resonate with you at
oh,
all? Okay.
absolutely. And we'll get into obviously one of the albums and one of the songs that discusses overthinking and overanalyzing and how that is a negative.
Yes.
And so looking too deeply into things is typically not the good way to go.
Mm. You know, the other thing, it's interesting, with some of the older like sacred texts, they would say that on the one hand, they're shallow enough or easy enough to understand, and they would use this metaphor that a mouse could walk through it, but deep enough and mysterious enough that an elephant could drown. And I kind of like that paradox too when it
Okay.
comes to Tool and kind of thoughtful lyrics, is there may be a surface kind of meaning that you can get out of it, but if you let it sort of seep in and trickle down, I don't know that you can fully plumb the depths of its significance.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not the one who's created it, then how can you truly understand where it came from? Um,
Absolutely.
so,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, okay, I want you to kind of like begin where you want to begin in terms of Tool, beginning to kind of analyze it. But one thing I will throw out there just for the listeners, and I'm going to include this in the show notes. There was an article I found. His name is, let me find it, James Ryan Leonard, and he has an article on Medium where he listens to the album that we're going to talk about, Lateralus, and he just kind of gives his almost spontaneous interpretation of what he gets out of each song. And maybe from time to time, I'll read just a couple things he had to say to just check in with you and see what you
Yeah.
think. So,
So we're mostly talking about the album Lateralis, right? And so
Lateralis. Okay, I want to make sure I'm
That's-
saying it right.
that's how I've
Okay.
always heard it, and I've heard a few. I think I heard an interview of that's how they pronounced it, but they have a few other things that they pronounce other things, and I'm sure I'll get one of those wrong, but I believe that's how they say
Okay,
it.
so Lateralis. Okay, got it. Yeah.
So this album came out at a very impressionable time in my life. I graduated high school when this album came out, and it came out in May of 2001.
Okay.
And with pretty much all their albums, it takes a long time to really digest the music because some of the material is incredibly long. It's also incredibly complex at times. There's not only and then the lyrics can be, again, you can kind of dive deeper than is originally intended. But that's why their replay value is so high for me. Especially as a musician, I have a background as a musician, degree in music theory, worked in recording studios for many years. And I think when it comes to listening for music for me, of course I enjoy the way it makes me feel and like melodies and harmonies, but I also have an understanding of what notes they're playing, the key signatures they're playing it in, and also how difficult is this composition, and how is it all constructed together. So
Got you.
So when I found them and started listening to them a lot, I realized that holy crap, they're playing really strange key signatures, really strange time signatures, and they're all interweaving. There's a lot of polyrhythm. So a polyrhythm would be, let's say you're playing in what's commonly as 4/4 time, and then you have another musician that's playing in 6/8, and so every 4 measures they meet up.
Wow.
So it sounds like chaos, and like throughout, like at the beginning it's right on time, and then 4 measures later it's on time again. But in the middle of that, it sounds like it could potentially be chaos, but then it always finds its base. And they do that constantly. And sometimes it's a polyrhythm with only one musician. So like the drummer, he's Dan Carey, so he's regarded as one of the greatest rock and roll drummers of all time.
Wow.
And he has this keen ability to play multiple rhythms at the same time. So he's got these 4 appendages, and he can play multiple different key signature or time signatures, and they eventually always meet up at a certain point. And like when you're, and I'll like kind of tap on my like legs and try to like find out which one is how it's meeting up with the other. And it's just, you can dive as deep as you want, or you can just listen to it. So that's kind of my one of my main obsessions with them is not only does it sound fucking cool, but there's so many layers underneath it. It's a giant onion, and you can just pull it apart as much as you want and go as deep as you want.
Wow. So can I ask this with the polyrhythm thing you were saying? Again, I want to be careful. We were just talking about this, not to extract too much out of it, but does it say anything about the world, or can we somehow extract a feeling state that maybe it evokes when you talk about kind of, it's almost like a disorder and order kind of thing. That's almost what I'm hearing.
I think so. Oh man, that's an interesting way to, I think you can think of it at like the first thing that popped into my mind, I guess, was all of us individuals are unique in our own way. And we can interpret, texts or opinions or things individuals say in a variety of ways. But as long as we communicate, we can come to common ground. And I don't know, that was the first thing that popped into mind when you asked that question. So it's, as long as in the album, a big thing that is discussed is communication and lack of communication and how that can rip people apart.
Absolutely.
And so when you mention like how does that how does multiple time or polyrhythms kind of interweave with daily life, I think that was the first thing that resonated with me, I guess, is people will interpret everything differently because we're all unique individuals. But as long as we communicate, we can find that common ground.
Oh, I like that. Okay, where that's leading me, man, this is like some free association kind of shit. I love it. This is like some real therapy stuff. I'm thinking about, lately I've been listening to these podcasts where whether it's the host or the guest, they're kind of lamenting the fact that in our current, United States political, social climate, we've gotten to a point where there really isn't like a consensus reality. Here's the thing, though. On the one hand, having been a student, more of like an armchair student of philosophy, I kind of recognize that's kind of always been the case in some ways. There's always been competing schools on what reality is. But maybe there's something to the current moment where we can't even fucking agree on what truth is or what facts are. And that's an issue, I think. But that's what's coming up when you talk about different perspectives, but then the importance of communication.
Yeah. I think we could go on a long diatribe of what's wrong with our political system. And I think the biggest one is clearly lack of communication. And there's these two conflicting parties are telling us what is the reality that we should be living in while not being cognizant of that there's many realities that we all live in. Reality is purely subjective. So and no one's really wanting to agree with that.
Resonate with that quite a bit, man. Okay, so I don't know if you'll agree with this, but another thing that's been coming up for me is I'm kind of allergic to certain groups prescribing how one should live their lives. I know that's like a very broad statement, but I'll be very specific. Just given what I do, working with a lot of men, I try to emphasize kind of gender and masculinity. And I try to be a part of like these Facebook groups and various different like organizations where they're trying to frame kind of a healthy masculinity. But I just get turned off because everything is so prescriptive. This is how it has to be. This is what it means to do this. And I'm like, fuck. I get general principles, but maybe we're pushing it too far.
Yeah, I don't want to live in a box.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
The moment you put me in a box, I'm going to break the fuck out.
Exactly. There's a song on this album that one of the lyrics is you need to draw outside the lines. And
which song is that?
That's Lateralus. That's
Lateralus.
That's the main title track. Yeah. Note on that one, hands down my all-time favorite. Not only is it my favorite album of all time, but that song specifically, I've probably listened to more than any other song.
Okay, so why that song in the whole album? What resonates
What we should
so
do
much about you?
is go track by track, because it eventually kind of, in my opinion, it bleeds into why it's the place that it's in the song order has a greater meaning on why it's placed there.
Okay, let's do it. So what's the first one?
The first song is "The Grudge." So, in my opinion, the entire album is the scope of realizing that you have these character traits that are, that are unwelcoming and that are negative, and your insecurities, more or less. And then if you're able to identify them, then you can grow and become better and evolve and be better human. So the first track, "The Grudge," it just kind of goes over that many people will hold grudges against many people, and sometimes flippantly. There's no reason, no rhyme, no reason, and this political structure that we just briefly touched upon. People are going to hate other people because of some stupid fucking reason, and it's,
Yes.
and whether they can explain it or not is it might be the most ridiculous reason, and they just say, "I just still don't like you," and
It's so true. Have you ever seen The Office?
oh, absolutely.
Okay, so
yeah.
do you remember the scene where Angela is talking into the camera? I forget which season, and she's like, "Yeah, I have a sister." And this is not verbatim. I'm paraphrasing, but I haven't like fucking talked to her in like 4 or 5, 6 years, and I don't even remember why.
Yeah.
We just but she's dead to me.
Yes.
I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of people like that.
It's flippantly.
That's the grudge.
Exactly, and people are just very unwilling to get past that, and that's more or less that's the first track of the song or of the album, and there it is.
No, and I know I want to say it again. I think I've mentioned it in a previous episode, but geez, especially after the election in 2016, and then even through COVID, I worked with individuals who literally were like, my mom or my dad or my uncle are fucking dead to me. I'm not talking to them because they voted for X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not discouraging people to have, their views or strong opinions. I mean, do whatever you need to do, but to cut off a family member who you deeply love because of that,
I think
there's something off about that.
Well, yeah, there's obviously a greater issue in that standpoint. And if we're all judging each other purely on a single issue, then we have a lot of work to do.
Okay.
But yeah, one point I wrote in my notes was at the end of this song, they constantly repeat the phrase "let go." We need to let go, and then kind of progress. You need to let go. You need to learn. You need to adapt, and then you can. From that point, then you can grow. So those are one of the notes that I took on.
Okay,
that.
so Aaron, I love the concept of let go. I'm sure it can mean various different things. What does it mean to you? Or when you hear that at this stage in your life, what do you think of?
Impermanence. As soon as we attach ourselves to something, then it's important to appreciate and love everything that you can experience. But it's also finite. And so the more that you can appreciate it in that moment and understand that it will go, but you can still find the value and the joy within the moment that you have it. But if you bind to it and it's the only thing you live for, then that's also bad. And take for what you learn from it, and then expand on it. Just don't hold on to it to the point where when it doesn't exist anymore, that you find yourself in a hole. Learn from it and grow from it, but understand that all these things that we experience will end.
Yeah.
And
I don't want to speak for you, but recently I've been wrestling with, when I was younger, for whatever reason, maybe it's just a part of my biology, I wanted to identify and cling to labels around groups I was a part of, whether it was a philosophical school or something around religion, or, I wanted to say I am this, and I found some kind of comfort and status in that. Lately, I've wanted to kind of let go and say, I'm not sure anything can fully define me.
Yeah.
I
As soon
I
as
don't
you,
want to hold on so tightly.
if you define it, are you willing to change from that? I don't know.
I want to.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't want to define it, because
Yeah.
it makes it a lot harder.
Yeah.
And then you gotta sort of, defend certain things, and you feel like you can't go against the grain of this particular school of thought or whatever. And I'm like, hold on.
It's important to be able to identify when you're wrong too. So, yeah.
Would you say your appreciation of Buddhism throughout the years has helped you with this concept of letting go?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely one of the major contributors to that.
Okay.
Impermanence is a Buddhist philosophy, and it's taught me a lot about how to not. It's like the grudge. How can you hold a grudge flippantly and lose a potential way to learn and grow from? You're purposely avoiding that. So you need to realize that I need to let go and find a way to find meaning in what's happening, and then move forward.
I would hate to suggest that we can kind of throw out these, one or two steps for people to do to ultimately get or embody this concept of letting go. But in your own life, have you found something practical or something that somebody could do that just helps you get into that state of letting go? Is there anything sort of tangible you could throw out there?
So meditation has always been critical for kind of my daily ritual.
Okay.
I kind of go through waves of being very strict on the practice, and then at times I'll miss it for several weeks on end. But something that it's just is a zafu. It's a pillow that you sit on, and you contemplate. If you can sit for 5 minutes, that's great. If you can sit for an hour, that's great. But as long as you're sitting, then you're moving forward. And I've had these conversations of why like, how do you think of nothing? I was like, that's not really the point. It's the idea of being able to sit, try to clear your mind, but it's impossible to do that.
Yeah.
So you'll constantly have these feelings, these memories, these interactions that you've had with people. And this is how you kind of develop this idea of impermanence and grow from it, is that once you have the thought in your mind, how quickly can you catch yourself, appreciate that feeling, that interaction, and then go to the next thing? Because if you constantly just sit and sulk or sit and just, it can drive up these emotions that are unnecessary, and it just helps you. And I don't want this to come off as I don't appreciate these feelings that I have. Is like I'm experiencing joy. Okay, let's get rid of it. No, it's teaching you to live in that moment so you can be experiencing that more, rather than trying to, let your mind drift and think of other things when the point is you should be sitting in this moment and enjoying it.
I love it, Aaron. Yeah. So two things that come up for me is, one, the last episode I had a friend on who's a pastor in Houston, and he practices something called centering prayer, which actually flows out of Eastern spirituality and Buddhism. That there was a guy, I forget his name. Ah, damn it. Anyways, he kind of formulated this type of prayer, which is silent. There's no words in certain versions of it, but it's about, in his words, just beginning again or returning to this state of mind. When it gets distracted, you just kind of return, and that's the practice.
Yes,
It's training that aspect of the brain to just return and be calm and at peace.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, no, I think that's really important. And then the other thing I forgot what I was going to say. The other thing that comes to mind is I totally forgot. So we'll have to just, move on. There you go.
Hey,
I'm letting
just
go.
let go. You just let go. So
I'm just
let's
letting go. So, okay, there's The Grudge. What's the next song?
the next one is called The Patient. Now there's theories on what this one is about. And, I'm going to leave those alone
Sure.
because they seem pretty personal for Maynard and what it was about, but that's not something I really feel I should touch upon. But what it means for me is, how long can you be? Obviously, it's talking about patience, and then it has the other tied in is like, could you be a patient like in a hospital or to a doctor? But for me, it's kind of the topic of being patient and having patience, and how long can one be patient? And we're constantly seeing these scenarios of probably telling us that it's time to move on. It's time to move on. Or if you hold on just a little bit longer, will you be rewarded for it? And I think that can be a constant struggle for anybody with anything that's, difficult to live through, like how patient can you be? And if you can just wait a little bit longer, will you get to the other side? Or is it time to just let go? Like I think that weighs heavily on me a lot. I tend to feel like I'm a pretty patient person. When I'm at work and even at home and with my friends, I tend to be the individual that listens first. And I'll take the scope of the room and just get an idea of what the vibe is, what the feel is, and then once there is a bit of silence, then I like to contribute. So I like to think of myself as that, but again, I struggle with patience myself. Like, I mean, I'm human, and I'll get frustrated, and if I'm sad or upset or angry about a certain situation, and then I always try to catch myself. It's like, I need to be a little bit more patient with this because the end result could be good, or I'll just eventually find out that I can let this one go.
Gotcha. So, I mean, part of what I'm hearing, if I'm hearing you correctly, is maybe there's a sense in which sometimes it's not the best thing to continue to endure.
Yes.
Which I think, I'm trying to go back to like,
that's what I'm getting at. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Like my training, I think patience comes from even the Greek word pathos, which is suffering, and it's a type of bearing of a situation. But sometimes it's not the right thing to bear it, and you got to let it go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, those who are suffering can try to find patience within it, and then there might be a light at the end of the tunnel. But yeah, I definitely agree with what you just said.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful.
Now, okay, I remember what I was going to say, and I think it's
Perfect.
important. So you were saying that you wanted to be careful not to suggest that we not feel emotions. I know that's my language, not yours.
Yeah.
But that meditation helps you not latch onto those emotions or let them build to the degree that it's really hurtful. This is one of the reasons I find the philosophy of Stoicism helpful.
Yes.
In part, it's one lens that I like to look at it through, reality through, because they were very pro emotion. What they were against was what they would call the passions, which are these really unhealthy emotions that grasp us and maybe control our lives.
Gotcha.
It has nothing to do with feeling emotion. It's a certain type of emotion and the way that it manifests.
Okay.
That's maybe problematic.
Yeah, no, I definitely identify with that as someone who, practicing meditation has definitely helped me to try to, be able to let go in some of those ways. I'm still an individual that is constantly in his head more than I should be. And I know at times that I need to stop diving down that hole, stop, drifting out to sea. I constantly battle trying to rein it in. And
I do too, Aaron, and I appreciate your vulnerability there. Isn't it amazing if we look at it from like a evolutionary or scientific perspective that whatever human consciousness is, that capacity to probably overthink is both a blessing and a curse.
Yeah. And again, this overanalyzing. We're going to come up on that song where it's, as humans, that's what we constantly do. And yeah, again, we're only human. And if we can at least recognize that when that's happening, then we can try to collect ourselves and realize, okay, what's actually happening? Not how am I perceiving it?
Right, right. No, that's good. Okay, so there's The Grudge, there's The Patient. What's the third song?
Next one is, so there's a lot of different little small interludes between these.
Okay.
But these are the main ones.
That are just like instrumental?
Yeah,
Okay.
correct. The next one, so the big one that was released, like what they refer to as the single, the first one was called Schism. And that is kind of, schism itself is where people will separate opinions and identify and separate themselves as individuals and basically break apart based off of what people feel and their emotions or their opinions. And the clear one on this one that resonates with me is that you may have a friendship or a relationship at a given time, and then for whatever reason we have to break up, or we have these differing opinions, and we're unwilling to meet in the middle. And I think that can, like, if it's a long relationship or long friendship, something happens, and then is it too great to fix, or are we just going to, and if it is too great to fix, are we trying to live with it, even though it's still a negative to do it? The example that I've seen when people talk about this song is trying to make, in the song, there's a phrase, trying to make the pieces fit. And they kind of use the analogy of when you're putting a puzzle together, and there's a piece that it seems like it fits, but it probably doesn't.
Oh yeah. I've been there.
Are you forcing it? Are you forcing that piece together? And you should maybe, remove that piece and kind of take the time to communicate and find what actually does fit. And so again, that song is pretty heavy for me, just purely because, we all have these relationships that we have strong opinions, and sometimes they get a little heated, and you try to, maybe you give a little too much to that person, and then then you start building a grudge, or you might, because you gave too much. And, but what's still very, very important is to be able to, if we can communicate, then we can properly make those pieces fit.
Yeah, no, that's so good. Okay, I know there's not just a one size fits all, no pun intended, sort of kind of a response to this question, but I just want to know what comes up to mind when I ask this. Are there, at this point in your life, at your stage, are there certain things that are very clear to you that would result in a schism? How I know that could get into some vulnerable stuff. Whatever you feel comfortable sharing, is it a value thing, or just a certain type of way that a person would carry themselves in a relationship that would make you feel like, I don't know that I can be connected to this? Or do you not see it that way?
I mean, that's definitely heavy.
I don't know that I have a good response to it.
I don't think I think that's something that needs to be sat on for a bit.
Okay. Maybe something that gets figured out with a little bit of patience and with some communication, like you're talking about.
No, that's exactly right.
Okay.
I mean, that's my kind of first reaction to that. We could probably sit here and think of countless scenarios that we've experienced in our life where that does happen.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's interesting. So one that sort of comes up for me is, if there's a sense in which I feel I'm being taken advantage of or manipulated in some way, it can even be like in a business interaction, that throws up all kinds of red flags and is very triggering for me.
Mm-hmm.
But as I'm trying to incorporate what you've just been talking about in light of this album, maybe there's a place to kind of take a step back, process, be patient, and maybe try to communicate what's happening
Yes.
instead of having a knee-jerk reaction, which
Yeah.
can be my typical like MO.
Yeah. I mean, you could just stay silent and assume that this individual is trying to manipulate you. Whereas if you speak up and say, this is how I'm interpreting what you're saying. And they might not even mean any of that. But if you're refusing to communicate on your side of the end, then you're probably equally to blame on the end. So
Wow.
I don't know.
No, that's good. That's good, man. You're getting me to think and feel, which is good.
Feeling is good.
Feeling is good. Okay.
Mm.
What's the next song that comes up? Or is there anything else around Schism? Because
No, I think the biggest thing that in that song that really means a lot to me is you can't make the pieces fit if they don't belong together. So to me, that song is really expressing that communication is key to have any healthy relationship.
sure.
And if you don't, then you're going to be trying to force it to stay together.
That's good. And, you know, as we reflect on friendship too, I mean, that's something that's happened to me over the years as I've grown, as I've matured, as I've sort of changed my views on some pretty fundamental things. There have been friendships that have, you know, fallen apart. Nothing really violent or terrible, but there's just not the level of connection that there used to be. And I have to mourn that, but I've tried even recently to kind of force it a little bit again because I miss them, but it just doesn't work that well, and I have to kind of let it go and come to terms. We're just different people. It's not a good or bad.
Yeah.
We've just kind of outgrown each other.
Yeah.
But there's a pain there, I think, and a sense of grief.
Sure. I think when you mourn a loss, it shows that it truly meant something to you.
Yeah.
So whether that's I think that's okay. Like you want that. So that's all I gotta say about that.
I remember, so I'm trying to think. I think one of the first songs I heard from that album, I guess I would have been in high school. In 2001, I was probably I think I was a sophomore, was Schism.
Yeah,
So that's a really iconic one, I think. And
that's the main song off the album. That's the radio one, more or less.
right. And then and I don't know, I don't think I've ever seen any other music video, but I remember that one being kind of trippy.
Oh, yeah, it had all that digital computer generated
Yes.
art, and there were,
which at the time was pretty fucking cool.
yeah, absolutely. Like there's what's always been a key art for their records were the expression of the third eye, and kind of going beyond the self and looking at the nervous system, and then how does that create a sense of inner being and all these things that you can, it can be very, have a sense of psychedelia, but also inward focus to grow from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping we get here, but I know some of the concepts I wanted to explore in light of Tool, but we can kind of wait until the structure of the album, you know, it's things like self, ego, identity.
Yes. Yeah, I think we'll touch upon that quite a bit as
Okay.
we go.
Awesome.
So the next two that kind of lead into each other. You can't have one without the other. There's parable and then parabola or parabola. I'm not sure how they really discuss that one.
That gives me nightmares because I hated math in high school.
Yeah, but I mean, parabola is the one is an actual concept, but the way it's spelled, it's more parabola.
Okay.
This is a big impact for me lyrically, and it's also just musically, it's really good. And it talks about kind of recognizing the realization of our own mortality and being able to recognize that we are more than the pain we are experiencing. Our body is that there's something greater than our body. There's something greater than that. And when we are under duress and pain, that we can move past that and realize that this is all just temporary and we will get on the other side. And the phrase in that, one of the main lyrics that always hits me is, all this pain is an illusion.
Yeah.
And anytime I'm going through any frustration, pain, sadness, anger, it's that, again, it kind of comes to that Buddhist meditation, is that realizing that this pain is an illusion and I will move on from it. This pain is an illusion and I will move on from it. And this is not always going to be like this. And so, yeah, that song has a lot of heavy meaning. For me.
I think that's what, I think it may be my favorite one, if not definitely top 3 in the album. So on the one hand, this is going to sound paradoxical, but I couldn't agree more with the lyrics, with your sort of interpretation. But can I throw out a recent, I mean, and it's always been there, but just kind of a tension that I feel with some of that language, whether it's Tool or whether it's certain strands of Christianity or Buddhism or Plato or just kind of ancient Greek thinking. There seems to be, you see it all over the place in Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, almost this disdain for the body. Almost this dualism around body and spirit, or body and soul, body, mind. And I want to get into why I struggle with that. I guess as I think about being a man today, as I do research into masculinity and toxic forms or just unhealthy forms of masculinity, there is sort of this disconnection from embodiment, like the whole tough it out mentality, just kind of mind over body sort of things.
I have a lot of feelings on that.
Okay.
And the body itself can be a constraint on what's potential for our mind to experience. And what that kind of means to me is that if I live with the mindset of I'm constrained physically, therefore my mind is constrained as well. I don't agree with that whatsoever. And I think if you do that to yourself, then you're not open to other possibilities that could happen. We obviously have, physical limitations, but in my opinion, our mind does not. And so I think it's important to explore that. I'm not going to get into toxic masculinity or focusing on any of that. That's not something I'm interested in talking about. What I am interested in just kind of discussing is just because you're cognizant of what you're physically limited by doesn't mean you're mentally limited to explore and expand.
With that, I couldn't agree more. I think of even somebody that's missing a limb, right? Or who has a severe disability. Those are times where I see, we can work on not having a strong limitation in terms of the mind, in terms of mindset, in terms of how you conceive of your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be quite powerful.
I think the easiest analogy that we can have is Stephen Hawking.
Oh, man. Yeah. Can you say just a little bit more about that?
Well,
I mean, on the one hand, it's quite obvious, but
he was regarded as one of the greatest scientists of all time. Researching the universe, black holes, and just the overall concept of what is this place, and he did it from a wheelchair, and he inspired millions of people to not be afraid to explore. And that's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking cool. And to explore so expansively and courageously.
Yeah. So
okay, how about, so I think part of what I was trying to say too with the paradox is, I think you might resonate with this in terms of the Buddhism. Even the practice of meditation is such an embodied thing.
Yeah.
You're right. We can't just sit here and think all day about these things and make the type of progress and improvement than if we actually sat on our ass and meditated.
Yeah. And it's important that you're not going to solve these problems with one sit.
Oh, I wish that
Like,
shit didn't happen.
No, it's going to take a long fucking time.
Oh my God. A lifetime, right?
Yeah, you're never done, man. I mean, that's the phrase that I've told you many times on the past podcasts is, no, you're never done. You always have the ability to continue forward. And as soon as you sit down and wait, then, well, that sucks. Don't do that.
Agreed. Okay, so I know I wrote a couple things down on the parabola. In fact, I'll just read what James Ryan Leonard said, and I think it'll resonate with what you said. Maybe we'll get something else out of it. But he says, when you die, you will leave this body for whatever comes next. We don't know what that will be, so there's not really any point worrying about it. Your body, the source of all the momentary ecstasy and pain that enters and exits your life, is a constant reminder that most of the future will exist without you, and most of the past will exist without you. The pain you feel right now is trivial. It is a creation of your mind, and it will pass. Try to enjoy the infinitesimal duration of existence you've been granted.
He said it more eloquently than I did. He had time to type it out, though. No.
Exactly. Okay, but so one of the things that comes out for me in reading that again is something that I try to remind some of my really depressed clients when we're kind of thinking through maybe something like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, where on the one hand he can write, after death, who knows what happens? Like, fame is an illusion. He can even sound kind of pessimistic, like nothing ultimately matters. And yet he can also encourage people to be super focused in the present, express gratitude for what you have right now. Like, how do you hold those two together? That on the one hand, in the big picture,
none of it matters.
Yeah, none of it fucking matters. Who knows what happens when we die? Maybe it's just blackness, right? We're eaten by the maggots.
Yeah,
but it does matter when I'm holding my daughter's face and giving her a kiss at night, or sharing a nice meal with a friend, or having this podcast. I think it really fucking matters.
I think it does. I think it's kind of on both sides of the spectrum. If you say everything matters, then how does any of those things have any value? So, meaning that if we value everything at the same level, how can everything mean everything? But
good point.
If nothing means nothing, then how does anything have any value? So that's kind of where I am with that, like saying none of this matters. I was like, well, if none of it matters, then why are we doing this?
Right.
But if everything matters, then why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this? Yeah.
So I think it's important to, that's kind of a mindset that I kind of live within.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Do you think death plays a role in this? And this is what I mean. I think I'm drawn, whether it's Marcus Aurelius or I think Heidegger gets into some of this, where death is not something necessarily to fear. Although, if I'm honest and vulnerable, I can fear it all the time. So I'm not saying that I'm above anyone. But if I'm thinking about it philosophically, death is like a horizon that can help me realize that I'm not going to endure forever, and that I should be making the most of every moment.
Yeah.
And maybe thinking about relationships with friends, family as really important, because they're not going to be there forever.
When I think of death, I see it as an opportunity to live now.
Okay. Yeah, me too.
So it's going to happen. It's going to happen to every single one of us.
Right.
It'll happen to some of us sooner than later. But why dwell on that when you can understand that, agree that it will happen? Okay, so what do I need to do to be present now?
Yeah.
Because we all have to accept that it will happen.
Yes.
And then move on from it.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it.
Sure.
And,
Sure. And how about this? I'm not trying to shit on like a certain flavor of Christianity, but I've never resonated with the idea that it can only matter today if there's some type of reward or some type of infinite time at the end.
That's where I'm not. That's something I just don't agree with. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But I'm not going to disagree with others, or even I want people to believe in what they want to believe. It's just not something that I do.
Fair.
So,
Fair. And I think one thing that actually, because I'll talk about it. One thing that came up when we discussed the living Buddha, living Christ, and this was a part of some of my studies too. When someone like the historical Jesus talks about eternal life, which gets used in different ways, I think the original meaning was like a full life, but in the present.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily about some future point in space and time, or some eternal reality. It's about maybe a mindful life.
That phrase is always very important for me to recognize, is be mindful.
Yeah, be mindful.
Be mindful now. And why should we behave in a certain way? So in hopes that we can we can have this eternal life. How does that affect? I've always felt that mindset affects how you're currently living. But that's always kind of the way I've always interpreted it. I mean, sure, it's teaching us to live a moral life to some degree.
Sure.
But I think I just subscribe to different ways to have that perspective, more or less.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, death is real, and it's important to obviously acknowledge that, but it's not something that we should be dwelling on. So.
And maybe that's a theme that's going throughout this whole conversation is, and I just said I don't like when people prescribe things, so I don't want it to be like this universal prescription, but maybe we should consider not dwelling on anything. Impermanence. Yeah, I like it. Okay, so anything else around Parabola, or should we go to the next song?
We can go to the next one.
Okay.
This one's great. It's Ticks and Leeches, and it's
I love the name. I've always liked the name of that one.
But yeah, it's aggressive metal, lots of screaming, lots of expressions of like "suck it dry," and like that's just, and it completely kind of goes off the title of the song, and it's constantly being in a relationship of some type where your soul is constantly being sucked, and you're trying to give and give, but no matter how much you give, it's all sucked out. And everybody's experienced that to some degree. And
and this is where I love the paradox of all this. This is where maybe, I don't know if this speaks to the title of his book, like the perfect union of contrary things, where it's on the one hand, be patient, and we probably aren't patient enough. We should kind of see things through. And yet there is a point where we should engage in a type of schism.
Yes. Yeah.
When our soul is being sucked dry. I ain't fucking staying in that. I would have, and I have actually in the past, but now I'm at a point where I'm like, fuck you, I'm out.
I mean, all those, like everything we've talked about, every human can relate to.
Yeah.
And this is going to sound awful
I love it.
this is the first analogy that comes into my mind when it comes to other music that's out there. I think it's great that there's songs that are about, having your toes in the sand, which I do like having my toes in the sand.
Yeah.
And this is really going to sound awful, but the first thing that comes to mind is country music, where it's about a dog in your pickup truck.
Yeah.
So now I'm not going to discredit all country musicians and music out there.
There's some good country music out there.
I love some great country
me
music.
too.
But this is the only thing first thing that's popping into my mind, which is why I really enjoy music like this, and having lyrics that have purely, that have a metaphor behind it, and so that I can interpret them in my own way and it has a greater meaning to a wider audience, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So sorry, country music fans that really like those songs.
We still love you,
We
but
still love you.
your music needs a little bit more depth, I think is what Aaron is saying.
No, I think that KK took that on his own.
Yeah. Hey, this is not going to create a schism, is it?
Oh,
You need to be patient with me.
Yes. Oh, I like it. But yeah, I think Ticks and Leeches is kind of one of the songs that doesn't require a lot of thinking around. It's an aggressive song. Stop fucking taking shit from me, and there it is.
No, that's good.
And yeah.
Do you think a person? Maybe we can't speak again universally about this, but in your experience, does it take a bit of self-understanding and maybe even maturity to get to the point where you can know when someone is really sucking your soul dry and you've got to kind of exit?
Sometimes you don't realize it until it's too late,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
Some people can recognize it sooner than others. Sometimes you are experiencing it for a brief moment, and then maybe you're leaving too soon. I don't know.
Oh, that's a good point. That's kind of haunting.
Yeah. So were you not patient enough? Wow, that's fucking heavy.
That is heavy. And see, and again, I'm going back to one of the reasons I love Lateralus and Tool, and this conversation is we're highlighting these things that all fit together in some ways, but they create these tensions where it's not an either or you can't just give someone a easy answer for what to do in a particular situation.
Yeah.
It's nuanced. It can feel contrary at times.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is navigating it and communicating and maybe bearing it sometimes, but then letting go.
Yes. All of that. Yeah.
Okay, so what's the next one?
The title track, Lateralis.
Lateralus.
And this is the one that I mentioned so this is my favorite, not only favorite Tool album, but favorite album of all time. This is if I have to pick a favorite song that I have to take to a desert island, this would be it.
This would be it. Okay.
Yeah. So going deeper into like what I mentioned earlier about Tool, for me, kind of goes in a variety of levels of appreciation for me, not only just because of how I enjoy the music, not only just the lyrics, but also the theory behind the music construction of it.
Okay.
This song has several time changes. It's not just in a metered 4/4 from the beginning of the song to the very end. No, like the main chorus itself goes from a 9/8 measure to an 8/8 measure to a 7/8 measure, and then it loops back on top of that. And so when you're listening to it, you're not kind of conscious of, oh, this is a really crazy time signature. And it's like, no, it feels natural. So what's also well known about this song is that it has a connection to what's called the Fibonacci sequence.
God, I was hoping you'd get to that.
So yeah,
I still don't know that I understand it.
So
and it sounds cool.
I remember reading this many years ago that it's like, there's no way that is like, did they just sit and like, we're going to write a song about the Fibonacci sequence?
The Fibonacci sequence.
But what I've read, and I'm pretty sure this was an actual discussion or an interview with one of the artists or one of the members of the band. From what I remember of it, is it's either the guitarist or the bass player came into a tracking session or a rehearsal, and he had this riff, the chorus riff, the one that was in 9/8/7. And the drummer, who's very into mathematics, and his drum setup is very mathematical based, and he's big into. Just look up Danny Carey and you can kind of go down that wormhole. So he brings up that 9/8/7 is a number within the Fibonacci sequence. And so the Fibonacci sequence, when you look it up, it's kind of drawn out like a spiral, and it's taking the value. So it takes the value of the previous number and adds it to it. And then then that basically continues the cycle.
Okay.
The Fibonacci sequence is also known as the golden rule
Mm.
within the natural world. You see it in nautilus shells.
Okay.
You see it in hurricanes. You see it in flowers. It's this perfect ratio that exists within our natural world. And the fact that they were able to identify this and construct it in the song. So Maynard, he applied some of that lyrical content to the lyrics itself.
Gotcha.
So when the song begins, he begins with one syllable words, and then he adds it all back. He adds it all the way up to, I don't remember how many syllables in the measure, but he's constantly adding up to that point and then going back down again.
Oh, wow.
And so not only is it this number of 987 that's interlaced within the chorus, but also the lyrics are following the syllables that match to that sequence, which is, it seems crazy to map out and purposely do that. But again, the Fibonacci sequence is everywhere in this world, and it will always occur. And the fact that it's happening in this is pretty cool to me.
That's really fucking cool.
But what I really identify with this, the Fibonacci thing is a very cool thing, but lyrically and musically is what I really identify with it. It's one of the main things that I've mentioned earlier was that if we overanalyze and overthinking, overanalyzing separates the body from the mind.
Separates the body from the mind.
And so if we continue to do that, then we sever ourselves, which is not good, and schism. And so it's important to be able to be aware of that. And when you do separate the body and mind, one of my notes says is like we have the potential of missing great opportunities. So this song is really, for me, is being aware of yourself that you are open to new potential, that you are open to new possibilities. This is the song that has draw outside the lines.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to think outside of it. And then like the big one that has always hit me the most is be willing to embrace the random and reaching out for bewilderment. Because if you don't embrace the random, then you have the potential of missing out on one of the greatest opportunities in your life.
Wow.
And there's right in the middle of the song, kind of like the breakdown is just, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking of it. And the way it makes me feel of with my feet upon the ground, move myself between these sounds and open wide to suck it in. I feel it move across my skin. Like just that feeling of it's okay to be vulnerable, be open to it, because you might experience something great.
Wow.
And that song is just my kind of life force of just be willing. Don't have this what if moment and not do anything about it. You know?
Absolutely.
So,
but that can be some scary shit too.
Fuck yeah, it can be scary.
Maybe that's a part of the point, right?
Yeah. But, and even if it doesn't work out, then you've learned. And how is that bad?
Yeah.
So that's a big reason. And that's it's a huge way how I live my life. And it's not because it's a Tool song or anything like that. It's just, it's also very Buddhist. It's
okay.
Be willing. It just means a lot to me. And it's definitely how I feel like it's a big reason where I'm at in my life is kind of going through that and kind of following that.
Yeah. Is there anything you can point to, in this chapter of your life where you've had to do that, sort of walk into the bewilderment?
Sure. Well, I think the one example that I can think of is making the jump to, there's a few. So I wanted to be a musician and get into recording. And
Yeah.
I first wanted to be a musician, but I realized when I went to school in college that holy fuck, these people are a lot better than me.
Yeah.
And no amount of practice is going to get me there.
Got you. You know what? But I'm okay. Hold where you were because I want you to continue because it's
Okay.
gold. It's fucking great. I'm always telling guys it's really fucking important to know who you're not.
Mm-hmm.
To I don't want anyone to limit themselves, but goodness gracious,
So I was-
there are
yeah.
things you can't do.
That's another example. It's like, so I was a collegiate swimmer. I swam for a long time, and I knew that I was not going to be on the Olympic team.
Gotcha.
I knew it.
Okay.
I knew it. But I knew that it would get me somewhere that would allow me to do something new.
Got you.
And so
Wow.
that was a big risk for me. So I continued doing it to give myself another opportunity to do something that had great potential.
Okay.
I experienced some incredible things when I did that. And when I realized that I might not be able to be a musician for whatever reason, I realized, hey, I could learn how to be a recording engineer or producer and work with musician in that way.
Sure.
That was incredibly rewarding. There were financial difficulties when it came with that because that's a really, really hard life to live. And,
Oh yeah.
and at that time, it's like now at times I do think of if I was patient, would I have found great success in that field?
Mm.
And instead of, letting go of it, I think about that a lot sometimes. But if I wouldn't be where I'm at today if I decided to be patient. And
Got you.
and I am totally okay with that. So I have decided to let that go. And I guess there's that kind of example of
Sure.
be willing to jump,
Is there any way just, working with beer and I mean, literally what you do for a living that is kind of at the edge of bewilderment where you're having to kind of have that relationship with the chaos or the unknown that can actually produce some fruit?
The easiest one for that is I really enjoy making barrel-aged beer. So beers aged in used spirit, used wine. And then at times you can use, fruit, spices, and you can, what the beers that I really enjoy making are, they use multiple yeast strains and bacteria strains that I basically have to let go and allow them to make whatever they make.
Wow.
So the analogy that I have always used when it comes to describing beers like this is when we make beers like Harmony that we're drinking or Art Car or Lawnmower, is that all that is a single cell type of yeast. It's all fermented in stainless steel. We can make it consistently time and time and time again. And that's kind of like having a dog. You give a dog love, shelter, food. 99% of the time, it's going to behave pretty well.
They're going to be good.
They're going to be good. These barrel-aged beers that use wild yeast, bacteria, fruit, and a wood barrel, which is porous, you're allowing the outside environment to affect it. And it's not going to be consistent all the time. And then that's where the cat analogy comes in. You give it love, food, and shelter, it might shit on your rug.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's going to be very finicky.
Yes. So you have to be willing to take the risk to make these beers because it's kind of one of those examples where the sum is greater than the parts. And
I love that.
You can't, and we dump a lot of those barrels because it doesn't always produce what we want. And that's kind of, I love that embracing the random and just letting it go and see what happens. And that's something that I really enjoy about my job, is being able to put all these variables in place that we've had success with and then seeing what happens.
Yeah. No, I try to live out this idea. I talk to a lot of my clients about the importance of just navigating the ambiguity, holding space for, the chaotic, the bewilderment, because that's life.
Yes. Yes.
You know,
we are all presented variables. we can try to put them in places that we want, but in all reality, we have zero control over it. Our only ability is to how quickly can we adapt to it.
Mm.
So, yeah.
That's good. Now, you mentioned in the song the concept of the spiral.
Yeah. So
Is-
lateral, yeah, at the end of it, it's talking about don't be willing to spiral out and see what the potential is at the end of this.
So, spiral as a metaphor, is that important to you?
Yeah. I mean, if you're following, yeah, absolutely. And it keeps on talking about spiral out. And if you follow that Fibonacci, Nautilus shell, it just continues to grow and grow and become greater and greater. And I think that has a huge potential if as long as you continue to be willing to embrace the random and be willing to follow it. And
it kind of, I'm kind of just having this association now. I can't remember the exact quote, but in Carl Jung's autobiography, he talks about, I'm going to put it kind of in my own words, but I think it's capturing the spirit of what he was saying, that the goal of a person's life is not to kind of reach this certain point, or, in modern circles, we talk about, self-development or this certain growth that we reach. He said it's really about circumambulating or just going around the psyche or the soul and actually following the spiral.
yeah.
And letting oneself do that freely.
Mm-hmm.
That is what kind of existence is about, if you can get into that flow.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah, I really like that too. And it takes off some of the pressure, I think.
Yeah. Be willing to write it.
Be willing to write it
Mm-hmm.
and not resist it.
Yeah.
But I don't want to sit here and bullshit you and say that's easy for me. That's fucking hard.
Yeah. Excellent. Absolutely. It's hard.
I kind of see, there's a part of me that wants to know what the straight line is and how do I get there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, riding the spiral, I think is where I want to be.
No, I like that. Yeah. Don't be afraid to spiral out. Yeah.
Okay, so what's the next one? This is some good stuff,
So,
man.
Yeah. So the next one is the last one, which is reflection.
Oh yeah.
And the phrase that is repeated throughout is before I pine away. And it's kind of that expression of pining away is used to describe the act of being weakened or withered. And
I wondered about that, man.
And which kind of can be leading to the idea of death.
Okay.
But also it can kind of have this impression that it can be referring to more of a mental or emotional separation, and then kind of being accepting of death, and kind of that allows you to get rid of your ego in some ways.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, he talks about crucifying the ego.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it kind of takes the whole album in its own way to reflect on everything that has been discussed throughout it, and literally just reflects on it. And,
Okay.
Yeah, it's a much softer song, and it's not as heavy, and yeah, it's also a very beautiful song too.
Okay. So Aaron, I'm not sure exactly how to ask this. I don't know if I should say, from Aaron Inkrott's perspective or from the Buddhist perspective. Maybe those are the same. Maybe you have a different nuance. How do you think about our relationship to the ego? Because I hear a lot of language about, completely destroy the ego or kill the ego. There's other circles that would say, hold on, at some level we have to have an ego as these biological creatures. There's a role, there's a function for it. Where do you kind of land in all of that discussion on the ego?
So in Buddhism, it really pushes on removing the ego.
Okay.
Because that can have the effect of being selfish, being, self-loathing, not being willing to accept, not being willing to give, and it kind of the easiest example of things that don't have an ego are, are animals, are insects, or even just nature itself. There is a lot of beauty in this world, and humans tend to kind of fuck it all up
It's
sometimes.
so true.
And what's the reason for that? It's the ego. It can get in the way of a lot of beauty. And
Damn, that's good.
I think that's kind of where I am with crucifying the ego, removing the ego, and being able and willing to, remove yourself and witness and appreciate what's happening around you.
Okay.
So.
I like that. Okay. I wanted to read the little segment from James Ryan Leonard and his little article on Medium about this album. And he says this about reflection. Even at your weakest, even at the end, remember, like the moon, we are only reflectors. When we receive light, we provide light to others who might otherwise be lost in the dark of night. If we receive only darkness, we can cast no such light. Become then a source of light. Give your light to those who will reflect it to others, and do it now while you're still able. And as I read that, as I listened to the song several times this week, I thought of a possible connection that I wanted to kind of ask you about. I know in texting with you, we realized that we both appreciated Cormac McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I haven't read all of his books, but I've read many. One of my favorites is The Road.
Yeah.
Which is kind of this post-apocalyptic story of a father and a son.
Yeah.
They're kind of navigating this really gruesome world where there's awful shit from like cannibalism to all kinds of violence. And at various points in the story, the son looks at the dad and says, is there anything about us that's different? Or I think what he's really asking is, are we as fucked up as this whole world seems to be? And the dad says, no, we're the good ones. And we kind of carry the fire.
Yeah.
And I know this idea of carrying the fire, carrying the light is actually really important to Cormac in some of his kind of thinking. And so I wanted to see what you thought about carrying the fire, that metaphor, how it relates to the song, if it has any significance for you.
So he's one of my favorite authors, and the Road is quite good. Carrying the fire. It's, I guess when I think of that, that phrase is, if we believe in something so firmly, how long can we hold on to that fire and keep it lit? I guess it's, for the father and son, it would have been so easy for them to give up.
Oh yeah.
And it kind of reflects back on the song Patience, the patient. How long are we willing to do this?
And in some ways not lose our humanity.
Correct. And in the end, does it really matter? What, is there an end in sight? And even if they feel and know that they are one of the good ones, then they must carry that fire as long as possible. Because then hopefully they can have impact on others as they meet in this world. And then they might not be carrying the fire to the end, but the fire can be carried by someone else. So,
yeah. And I don't know, maybe to make a connection to something we were talking about before, at least in the way I see things today, maybe this will change. There's a sense in which maybe the ultimate fire is going to go out one day, but I still don't think that means we shouldn't try to carry the fire today.
Absolutely.
Right? Like going back to that ultimate meaning, I'm not sure the universe means anything at all in kind of a grand scale. And that's kind of scary and sobering, but I'm going to fight until I'm blue in the fucking face.
I think,
helping my clients, my loved ones, friends believe that it's worth living today, that there's a reason to carry the fire.
Again, we expressed, if nothing means nothing, if nothing matters, or if everything means everything, then that's not the case. We have to be willing to recognize that. And I think that's really nice.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, maybe that's a place to end. But before we do that, is there anything else you want to say about Tool or any kind of philosophical thought you've had?
They're not for everybody.
Okay.
It's heavy music. I kind of went off on country music a little bit, which that's fine. That's why there's so many genres of music. There's something for everybody out there.
There is.
But for me, some people don't like aggressive music. But what's important to understand, though, is that music has this ability to take forms that are similar to all the emotions that we experience as humans. And so even if you don't listen to heavy music, have you ever been angry before? Have you ever wanted to express frustration? And not to say that every song that they have is within that purpose or within that vein, but it's also something that we should not be ignoring these emotions.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where Tool comes into play for me. But I also love, piano sonatas and very soft classical music. I mean, that's kind of where I was as my background. And
Okay.
you shouldn't be afraid to listen to everything, which is kind of relates to, you can't be afraid to feel. You can't be afraid to feel. You can't be afraid to learn. You can't be afraid to grow. And it has all these
Spiral out.
Yeah. It's not just, to me, it's never just a song. It's never just an artist.
I agree.
And that's where it's at for me.
Okay. All right, Aaron, you've got to tie it up by giving me or giving us your statement around even the concept of Tool, right? The name of the band. You talked about kind of these two meanings to it, right?
Yeah. So the one side is using a tool is something that you can use to progress forward, to fix, to move forward. But then there's also the things like, man, if you're a tool, then you must be the fool and ignorant and don't be a tool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny. I work a lot with teenagers and they don't use the word tool anymore.
Yeah.
The word they use, I don't know if you've ever heard it, is simp, which
I'm not familiar with that word.
I don't know if you need, but so a simp very specifically it's like a tool, but I guess today in 2022, a simp is like a guy who basically gives himself up and loses himself for the sake of like a female. He'll do anything and everything just for her attention and her approval. And this is seen as a very negative thing, right?
Yeah.
And I see it philosophically as, you're kind of giving up you and your journey for someone else, which you should never do. What a tool-like thing to do.
Yeah, no, I think, because they're also, I mean, the musicians themselves, a lot of their songs are hilarious, like very comedic.
Yes.
One of their albums, they have it's on Anima, and it's all in German, and it has a very aggressive Third Reich feel to it.
Yeah.
But all it is a cookie recipe.
Nice.
And
so they're fucking with you.
They're fucking with you. And don't take everything so seriously.
And I like that. We spent the whole like hour and a half going really deep. And yet I want to be able to leave here and say, in some ways we've said nothing.
Yes. It's like, just don't take it so seriously.
Yeah. That ties in with letting go, I think.
I think so. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a good point.
Okay. All right. So Aaron, would you mind just ending with the line of the podcast, which is just continue the conversation?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.